Dr. Nurse Podcast fam, welcome to the Dr. Nurse Podcast. I'm so happy that you decided to join me today. Today we are talking with Nick Loper. He helps people earn money outside of their day jobs. He's an author, an online entrepreneur, and the host of the award-winning show Side Hustle Show podcast, which features new part-time business ideas each week. As chief side hustler at thesidehustlenation.com, he loves deconstructing the tactics and the strategies behind building extra income, which you guys know if you've been listening to my podcast at all, that I'm all about it. Welcome, Nick, to the podcast.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited to talk to you today. I can't even contain it. I first wanted to just kind of have you describe to my listeners kind of your story, how you see yourself, kind of what you envision, or you kind of how you see your role in day-to-day life.
Oh my gosh. Well, husband and father, first and foremost. And then outside of that, been doing this podcast for like 10 years. And that's just nuts to me. It started as a $60 mic in the corner of the living room. And like, is anybody going to tune into this stuff? And it was a completely life-changing experiment. It took a long time, to be fair, but it's been an absolute blast to kind of source and share these incredible side hustle stories. And that's what most of it is me pointing the mic at other people and saying, well, how'd you come up with that idea? How'd you build that? How'd you get customers for that? How'd you figure out how much to charge? How did you grow that thing? All that stuff was driven by my curiosity in the early days. And it was fascinating. And it still is now 550 something episodes later.
Incredible. So I heard about you through your podcast, and then I wanted to do my own research. And so I bought your book, The Side Hustle, which I just love. I read it. I love it. I think it's fantastic. It's a really great place to start for someone that's looking to generate $1,000 a month or more from working a side game on your off time. And as a nurse, and nurse practitioners, a lot of us do shift work. And so we have time off. And so what I've been noticing through different conversations, Nick, is that when nurses get quiet and they spend a little time alone and they let their souls talk to them, they start creating. And they've been able to create some really incredible businesses and merchandise product type businesses and a lot of stuff that's been really neat, on top of using our nursing skills to create healthcare related businesses as well. So right. I thought we could chat a little bit today, if you wouldn't mind, and kind of describe how a nurse can get started with a side hustle and kind of where you would take someone if they were like, all right, Nick, I want to jump into the side hustle game. Where do I even start?
Yeah. So the common advice is to, draw that ideal Venn diagram of your skills in one box, your hobbies and interests in the next box, and then, what you've been paid to do and, what you would love to do. And like the magical overlapping center is like, oh, that's the ideal side hustle for you. And what we found is for a lot of people, there's no overlap. It's like, well, my skills are over here, my interests and hobbies are over here, and like what people would pay me to do is like off in this other circle. And it's like, well, then what? And so instead, I think it makes more sense to start with pains and problems. And actually, just this morning, recorded an episode with a friend of mine on just like business idea brain dump. Like, look, here's, a couple dozen business ideas that ought to exist in the world, or that you could start. Like, and almost all of them were born out of our own pains and problems with kids, like trying to sign up for summer camps, or, he threw out like the pet discouragement service. Like, oh, the kids really want a dog. I want the service that like has a really difficult to train dog, and they just like shows you how hard this is actually going to be. And so just throwing out ideas that ought to exist into the world, but a lot of them born from pains and problems. And so normally like to be a little more optimistic, but for this exercise, you got to put on your pessimist hat and just take notice of all of the annoyances that happen in your day-to-day life, everything that your spouse or partner is complaining to you about, everything your kids are complaining to you about, everything your peers, neighbors, coworkers. Like, you start to pick up on like, oh, everybody seems to be griping about this thing, or this is a pain for me. And then you can turn, because on the other side, like that's what I typically spend money on, is like make this pain go away. Like, so like I was trying to strip wallpaper off our bathroom. It's like, I think my time is probably better spent. So like going on TaskRabbit and like finding like somebody else could come and do this for me for a couple hours. Yeah. But like on the other side of those pains and problems is often a business idea. I think it's easier to sell those types of, easier to sell pain pills than it is to sell vitamins, right? Like I want to,
Ooh,
my
yeah.
back hurts. I need this to stop right now versus like, okay, how can I prevent this from happening in the future? Like, it's not urgent yet, but if you can be on the pain side, a little bit easier to get started and find customers that way.
Yeah, I think that's really cool. What you're describing and what I talk a lot about on my podcast is gap closers. So finding something that needs to be filled, finding a problem that needs to be fixed. These are things that you can easily do by just paying attention to the world around you. And as nurses, we're in the trenches with our patients. We see these things happening and we have a unique front row to finding simple problems. And there's a lot of nurse inventors that have, again, come up with different fixes and been able to invent things for that exact thing that you're describing of a problem. But again, for the nurse that's just like, hey, listen, I want to start, possibly a coaching business, or, I went through and wrote down a bunch of things that you could do as a side hustle as a nurse. And so we talked about nurse writer, nurse blogger, nurse podcast, YouTube, digital products, merchandise. There's a lot of things that you can get into as a nurse. And one of the things that a lot of nurses are also super interested in is creating passive income, which I actually feel like is this unicorn that we're all chasing that doesn't exist, because I think everything has to be managed. I don't think that you ever get away with just something completely passive. You have to have your hand in everything. It's just a matter of how much, and then how much time do you have to put in the forend to kind of get that passivity in the back end. So what would you recommend for a nurse that's like, okay, so I hear you, find a problem, fix it. How do I then get that to continue to pay me and not require me to have to work on it all the time? Or is like I'm saying, is that a myth? Is that something that doesn't exist?
That's one of the great debates of online business. Like, is passive income real? And it's like there's the irony. I was thinking about this in the shower the other day. It's like, I don't get paid
All
while
the
I'm
best
working.
thoughts. Yeah. All the best thoughts come in the shower.
Like, I don't get paid while I'm working, so I can get paid while I'm not working. And it's like this kind of the weird backwards paradox. But yeah, it's like trying to set up. So passive income comes in probably 4 different flavors, right? There's the, I can go buy an income producing asset. I can buy a rental house, or I can buy a dividend paying stock, right? Problem is, it takes money to make money. The other option is like, well, I can go out and build a passive income or an income generating asset, a digital product that, create once, sell it over and over again. I think that one is probably the most viable, like low startup costs, like not a lot of investment aside from your time to go out and try and build this thing. And we can talk about different marketing channels for those. Passive income method number 3 is to like rent out an asset that you already have, or could you acquire. Like we had a guy, high school teacher, who was renting out portable hot tubs. And I was like, this is fascinating. He sent me a message on Facebook. He's like, Nick, you talked about some unconventional rental business. Like maybe it was a guy who had like a bounce house, inflatable party business or something.
Yeah.
And he's like, I got one for you. I do hot tubs. It's like, really? Hot tubs? Like, how does that work? How do you keep them? He's like, dude, I've got a fleet of like 25 of these things. They're always rented out, and he had this whole formula where you buy them used for this price and you rent them for this price per week or per month. It's like, wow, super cool. He had this whole process for sanitizing and everything. So that was number 3, kind of like renting out this asset, like another way to get paid over and over again. And his wasn't totally passive, because it's like, well, I got to go deliver this thing and I got to set it up for the customer and all that.
Sure.
And then number 4 would be reverse passive income. Like, what are the expenses that I can cut out, the recurring expenses that I can cut out and save money on a recurring basis? Those would be the 4 types of passive income. But we can go back to that, creating these digital assets. We had John Hawes on the show, probably like 2016 timeframe. He now runs nursing.com. He's like made some investments in this domain name over the course of several years. But he started, I want to say when he was still a nursing student, like creating these study guides and putting them up on Amazon. And he got very specific in these nursing study guides and had like 25 or 30 titles by the end of this year. He was making money from book royalties. He created like a medications app, like help you memorize, what medications solve what problems, what are their, don't mix with this, and all the kind of different things that you need to know for the testing and for patient care. And his was an example of, kind of turning what was happening in his life. I've got to study for this stuff anyway, so I'll go create the digital product related to it and turning that into some asset down the road. And he's built huge community and website on the back of those early days. But it doesn't have to be in the nursing field either. It could be, around any topic that you're somewhat curious about. And I say that just because I think that's what fuels you to keep going when you don't see the immediate results right away. Yeah. That's what it was for me. Some of my best content has come from that point of curiosity.
Yeah. I have two things to say. First, you have a quiz online that I love. I took the quiz on your website where basically you ask a series of questions like, what amount of time do you have? What are you interested in? You ask these very poignant, specific questions about kind of what you're looking for from a side hustle. And then you spit out with this quiz examples of what you can be doing based on what you've got allotment in your time for, which I thought was really helpful and a great place to start for a nurse that's maybe wondering what else could you be doing. Another thing that you said that I agree with is sometimes your side hustle doesn't and maybe shouldn't be in what you do. And the reason why I say that is because of nurse burnout, right? So we've got a lot of nurses that are exhausted and they're wanting to do something else. I mean, they are leaving the bedside in droves. We are going to come in. We're going to be we had a nursing crisis before, COVID-19. Now, after the pandemic, we have even more nurses that are like, I'm out of here. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. The joy and the love of what I was doing, I don't want to do anymore. And what I've been finding is that working part-time has been something that more and more nurses are considering and wanting to do, which then frees up that space outside of work for you to go and do something else that you really, really enjoy. And so that's the reason why I also feel like what you're offering and what you are talking about is so poignant, because what if you can go and create something else, not even related to nursing, that you're like, I want to sell hot tubs, and you enjoy selling hot tubs and you're a nurse on the weekends. I mean, like, why not? Why not? And what if that is the balance that strikes the balance for you to make really good money on the side, but then also keep your foot in the door with nursing and not get burned out? Because again, I think a lot of nurses go into nursing for that with the heart of, I want to help people. And what we end up doing is we end up burning them out. And it's not conducive to keeping good nurses. Like, we need, like, nursing care is everything. I just had a baby 2 months ago. The nurses made the difference. Like, the doctor was in there for 45 minutes. He was gone, but yet the nursing care was what was there day, moment by moment, second by second. And so we need good nurses. We can't burn them out, but I think we need to create kind of this hybrid system where we've got nurses that are, working from overflow and not from deficit, Yeah. And so that's really,
those L&D nurses are like, they're
saints.
The best.
Yeah, they're saints.
Somebody pointed out to me, like, well, they're the only people in the hospital that get to, like, work with happy people, like people who are excited to be there. I was like, oh, I never thought of it that way. Because I mean, just the patience required, like at our kid's doctor's appointment, he's like crawling up the wall in fear out of getting the shot. And the patience of a saint, this lady, just look, it's, and she just waited while he just threw his tantrum. I was like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. But totally, I get that. Where do you want to go? So there's lots of service-based options, which, doesn't really get you out of that time for money predicament, but could also be a bridge to say, I'm spending my off hours on this side hustle in kind of a service-based business. Maybe it's coaching, maybe it's consulting, maybe it's, being a doula, maybe it's doing CPR instruction, some of these ideas from your list, but it kind of empowers you in a way to say, like, well, I'm more than my paycheck, or I have the ability to earn beyond just at the end of my shift. Does that make sense?
Yes, 100%. I agree. And that's what I found through building my podcast and building my other streams of income. So I have an Etsy shop that I've been creating digital content. I've actually created with another company. We were able to partner up with another company and create booklets with digital information that helps nurses out at their clinical sites. So we partnered up with a company to do that. And then we kept the rights over the book so that we could go and sell them on our digital site as well. So we're getting a little bit of revenue from that. And so I'm just kind of building up these little streams, kind of like what you're saying. And I know that you've got almost, is it 17 streams of income coming in? I mean, something insane. So again, I think it'd be interesting to hear how you kind of added on streams and how you went like, okay, so I'm going to go ahead and take this on, because I think what I'm struggling with is just the amount of time as a mom. And this as a dad, I'm trading time with my children for the work that I'm doing that sometimes isn't paid. And it's really hard to stay motivated. What are some things that you do? How do you decipher, like, okay, I'm getting into this one, I'm not getting to this, I'm going to build this, or how do you choose what you end up pouring your time into?
Gosh, it's so hard, and that's the trade-off. I was like, well, what am I really doing this for? Like, what's the end game here? And one of the exercises that I'll have people go through as they're evaluating different side hustle ideas. Like, I'm trying to choose between these 5 things. Like, try and project out 3 to 5 years of a reasonable degree of success, and you can find somebody who has walked that path and is a little bit ahead of you, and you can kind of see, well, what is their day-to-day look like? Are they still putting in 80-hour weeks, or have they got a little more time freedom and flexibility? And if I kind of followed the same path and had a similar degree of success, like, okay, would that be a win for me? Because a lot of side hustles, it doesn't scale, or some of them don't scale the way that you might like. And you're like, well, I could do this today and I might be still doing the same thing in 3 to 5 years. And does that really get me where I want to go? And the answer might be no. It's like, okay, I got to try and choose a different path from the beginning. Now, I don't want that to cripple you from taking any action at the beginning, because it's like, one of the most common success traits of the 500 something guests on the Side Hustle show is, this bias towards action and, taking step 1, even if they didn't know steps 2 through 10, like, okay, I'm going to see what kind of reaction this gets in the market. If it works, great. If it doesn't, okay, I'm going to, pivot over to this other thing. So I think there's, a lot of people get stuck on the sidelines, and I don't want to have people stuck there too. It's like, there's a benefit from any action, even if it doesn't necessarily generate the results you were hoping for right away.
Yeah. I read that in the last chapter of your book, where you say that's the number one thing that all the entrepreneurs just kept saying repeatedly, was to just get started and to not be afraid of taking that shot. And you wrote that you will figure it. So that ends up leading to more opportunities, which is something I actually wanted to talk about too, because it was through the podcast that I reached out to this other company and I said, hey, do you want to sponsor my podcast? This is what it's about. And through that conversation with him, he and we recorded a podcast together, and I said something during the podcast and he was like, I like that. I want to come back to that. And I was like, okay. So we came back to it later, and it ended up being the thing that me and my girlfriend have been creating for the last 6 months for this company, has been these digital booklets. And it was literally just from the conversation that we had on the podcast. And so I think it's very true that even though, yes, I didn't have a plan, I wasn't like, oh, this is going to land me this thing. It did bring about other opportunities that where I was able to actually generate income from that conversation aside from my podcast. So that was one of the things that I found really, kind of cool. And that you kind of write, starting small, these low risk side hustles, I think are really great because it's just such a low barrier to entry. And then as long as you just kind of keep motivated and keep working at it and you just keep trying, I have this thing where I kind of go back to this scripture that I love, where it says, all work leads to something, all toil leads to profit. And so when I read that, I was like, oh, so like I can work at something and eventually this blind squirrel will find a nut. Like that's kind of what I began to realize, is that like you just have to keep at it. And I know that sounds kind of crazy, but maybe that's, putting mantras up all over around you so you can just go like, okay, I got to keep going. I got to keep going. Cause I've been doing a podcast now since it's been 2.5 years. I've been podcasting. My son's almost 4. I started when he was maybe 6 months, 7 months old. So like, yeah, it's been a grind. It's been a struggle there. I don't get paid for this. I don't have, all these different things. And so you just have to keep going. And then you do have a book, correct? That, if a side hustler is kind of wanting the progress or the journal, like to kind of journal through, how do I keep going? You offer them something as well, correct?
Yeah, several different books. So the one you held up earlier was The Side Hustles, kind of a broad introduction to side hustles. Here are the 3 main business models: product, service, audience-based businesses that you could start. Here's some examples under each of those. The Progress Journal is kind of my personal productivity journal. It's best if you have something that you're working on. Like, I tend to work best in kind of like short-term project-based sprints, where I could set myself a 4-week deadline. And I'm actually kind of going back through and kind of revisiting the structure, because it is very rigid, where like, here's a 4-week, project sprint. And it's like, well, if your project takes longer, then, kind of it spills over into the next thing. And so it's a kind of a tight structure. But again, that's the Progress Journal. And it kind of tracks the daily habits that I know when I'm doing them consistently, I feel better. Like I feel like I won the day. And it's just sometimes some simple habits of, naming my top 3 priorities for tomorrow, the night before. And if I check those out and like, in practice, trying to at least check off the first one before going into email and like reactive mode, like, okay, I'm going to move the ball forward on my own agenda. And that's huge for side hustlers. Like, well, we all have limited time, but if I could carve out a half an hour here, 15 minutes there, like just trying to build that positive momentum, super, super important. Just a gratitude habit, which is just, scientifically shown to, help you be a happier person. And then just trying to keep an eye on, what are the key metrics in this business, in this side hustle, and, focusing on almost, process goals versus outcome goals, especially early on. Like, I'm going to produce the podcast versus I'm going to get 10,000 listeners, or I'm going to, write 500 words for my website versus, I'm going to get 1 million, visitors from Google or something. Like trying to think of what are the process goals that will eventually lead to the outcome.
Yeah. One thing I was thinking about when you were talking was about your son, and you have a son, correct?
Yeah. 2 boys. They're 7 and 5.
7 and 5. And you also are, so with your income, have you been able to walk away from your 9 to 5 and kind of create that financial freedom that we're all looking for as nurse side hustlers? Is that something that you've been able to do?
Yeah, I've been really grateful to have been self-employed actually since 2008. My original side hustle was a comparison shopping site for footwear, which was a super random niche, but it would tell you where you could get the best price on your next pair of shoes and would earn affiliate commissions from Zappos, from Amazon, from all these other online footwear retailers. And so that was the thing that let me quit my corporate job. And so I was running that full time and starting other random side projects, including the side hustle show on the side from that. And then kind of within a year and a half, like, well, this side hustle stuff is a lot more fun to work on than this random shoe business. That became the main focus.
Yeah. One of the things I think was you were talking to is if you just start getting working, then what you will find is you may stumble upon the thing that you really do enjoy. So again, I think it goes back to what you were saying about just getting started on something, because it will morph. It could possibly morph into something different that you didn't even realize. Like you said, starting off in shoes and now being, this side hustle host, podcast owner, and with all the other things that you're doing with your books. And I'm assuming, do you have rental property as well?
I don't.
Okay.
We got kind of burned by like direct ownership in a lot of ways. Like I'm all for, rental real estate and, as a fast track to financial independence, right? You got like pretty much 3 paths. You can do the traditional investment path, and this is like the FIRE community of, I just saved 25 times my annual expenses in my, retirement accounts, or my, even my taxable investment accounts. Like, okay, historically the math says I can withdraw 4% a year. I'm roughly going to be okay. So that's method number 1. Like, it works if you have a high income and low expenses. Otherwise, it's like, you're probably never going to get there. Number 2 is real estate, especially because it can be leveraged and has lots of tax advantages too. And then the third way is the entrepreneurial path. Like, okay, how do I build my own income generating assets through the business asset class and go that way? So that's been the path that we chose to financial independence.
Gotcha. My last question of the podcast, would you share with my, again, nurse that's like, all right, so I hear everything, I want to get started, where can they go to see what you're about? What can they do to, hear your side hustle podcast? Tell them where you're located.
Yeah, would love to have you tune into the Side Hustle Show. You find it on any podcast app. If you hit up hustle.show, I'll build you a personalized playlist for what episodes might be most pertinent to you based on the answers to a few short multiple choice questions. So you can add that to your device. If you're kind of in the idea agnostic phase, just want to see what is out there. I mean, there's hundreds of episodes, of course, take your pick, choose your own adventure, but sidehustlenation.com/ideas is my big laundry list of part-time business ideas. There's no opt-in required over there. And so my hope is that helps people get the creative juices flowing a bit.
Fantastic. Well, thanks, Nick, for coming onto the podcast. Thanks for chatting with me and telling my audience your story and where they can find you and how you can help them. Because that's really what I want to do. I want to help nurses. I want to set them free. And yeah, I think this is a great place to start, is kind of in this hybrid workspace for nursing, because we can't lose good nurses. That's what's happening. And I think if they had something that brought them joy that they could maybe get paid to do as well, that would be kind of the sweet spot, is what I'd like to call it. So,
yes.
Alrighty, guys. Thanks for listening. And as always, don't forget to enjoy the journey of your career.